Welcome back to my YouTube channel where I am trying to keep track of my goal to read more fiction this year. So here is all of the fiction I read in February of 2025, starting with The City We Became by N.K. Jemisin. A little bit about this one. Every great city has a soul. Some are ancient as myths, and others are as new and destructive as children. New York City, she's got 6. So I actually have started to look for this book, I think like 4 years ago. I had read N.K. Jemisin's How Long Till Black Futures Month, and then I had seen that this book was out, and I don't really know what happened. I know when my library remodeled, I thought all of the fiction was in one section, and it turns out they actually do separate out science fiction to 2 different shelves. So I just recently found it, and so that's why I read it now. But that being said, having waited for a book that long and kind of anticipating it that long, I was kind of scared to read it because I was like, certainly my expectations are too high at this point. And it lived up to the expectations. It's a duology. Both of them are very good. And yeah, so it didn't disappoint after 4 years of waiting for it. So that, I think, is a good sign. So basically, at the beginning, I did try to read too much into this. I haven't read fantasy or science fiction for quite a while. I actually remembered that I do quite like it with these books, but I don't know, it talks about another dimension, and each of the boroughs is a person that's representative of the borough and the city. And so it was very confusing at first because I was trying to read too much into the logistics of how that works. And once I stopped doing that and stopped trying to understand it and just enjoy the book, I quite enjoyed the book. So yes, there's multi-dimensional things happening. You don't have to know how that works necessarily to follow the story and enjoy the books. And so at least that's my experience. And so yeah, I really loved how New York City is the feature of this book. There's a lot of scenes that happen in specific places in New York City, and having been there, it's really cool to be able to envision the actual place. That being said, if you haven't been there, there is this map that she writes out where things are happening. So I think that could help if you haven't been to New York City or aren't as familiar with New York. But it was a really, really great story. And I really liked that aspect of it, the New York aspect of it. The point of views do switch between all of the different avatars that are in the city. Just like a book I read last month, and I talked about how one of the point of views was really unbearable to read. That is also the case for, surprise, surprise, Staten Island. But I will say in this book, there's a difference because you really only have to read it for what's necessary for you to understand the plot. And she really doesn't dwell in that point of view for too long. So it's rough to get through, but it's only a few pages at a time instead of chapters at a time. So I really enjoyed that part of it. I really loved the ending of this book. It was a little bit of a twist, but I liked it. And yeah, there's also a line in here somewhere about being new to the city, and about how if you're new to the city, but you're trying to help strengthen it and build it, that's different than trying to destroy it. And that was from Manhattan's point of view, where he, is actually the avatar for for Manhattan Borough, is actually new to the city and a transplant and there to study. And so I thought that was kind of an interesting twist. Not really a twist because it's very at the beginning, but an interesting point at the beginning of this book where, gentrification is talked about a lot, and a lot of the real issues that happen in New York City are hinted at in this book. I think they're talked more explicitly in the second book of the series. But yeah, I just really liked that you can be new to the city and it can still be good kind of perspective. Though there's probably some bias because N.K. Jemisin, I just found out, is from Iowa and then has moved to New York City. But I really did like that kind of perspective added in. So would I recommend this book? Yes. And then read the second one, which is The World We Make, also by N.K. Jemisin. I'll read a little bit about this one as well. There's a lot in here. All is not well in the city that never sleeps. Even though the avatars of New York City have temporarily managed to stop the woman in white from invading and destroying the entire universe in the process, the mysterious capital E enemy has more subtle powers at her disposal. A new candidate for mayor wielding the populist rhetoric of gentrification, xenophobia, and law and order may have what it takes to change the very nature of New York City itself. So this book, I think, is a great sequel in the duology. You get a lot more from each character's whole world. Like, the world is built up much more in this book. It's really good in the first book. I don't think you could add any more to the first book, but you get a lot more of the different characters' experiences in this book, to the point where at the middle it was almost like every chapter you switched point of views, and it was like, what's happening with this person again, because so much was happening, and I loved that. You also get to hear more from the avatar of New York City itself in this book. Something happens in the first book where you don't hear much from him, so you get his perspective in this book too, and I really liked that. Yeah, and changing the points of view around, it was really nice to get to hear a little bit more from some of the different characters. I think you hear a lot from every character in the first book, but you get to know a lot more of like their backstories in this book, so I really liked that. That being said, there was so much going on. I think everything got closed up and every knot got tied, but I don't actually know if that's true. I would have maybe liked to hear a little bit more from Brooklyn's point of view at the end. But that being said, everything does feel at a stopping point. It's at a good stopping point. And I do like where all of the characters ended up at the end of the book. But just realistically, with how much world building she did in this book, she probably could write like a third, fourth, fifth if she wanted to. I don't think that's in the plans. They're calling it a duology, but it was a very good book. I really liked how this one also touched more on like the real threats in New York City. You talk about gentrification and xenophobia in the first book, but this book makes it much more explicit and talks more about how to maybe have some solutions sort of towards it. So I just really liked that. So would I recommend this book too? Yes, please read both. It's a great duology. I waited for them for 4 years and I wasn't disappointed, so I think that says quite a lot about the books. The next book I read was Because Fat Girl by Lauren Marie Fleming. This book I actually saw in a Substack note one day, and then the next day I was at a bookstore and saw it on the table at a bookstore, and I was like, oh, I should read that. The note had said something about like, they said I couldn't write a queer book, and look, after however many years, my publishers, it's, you know, now here on the table at Barnes & Noble even. And so I was intrigued by that, and then I saw it the next day. Here's a little bit about it. Hollywood isn't nice to women like Diana Smith, but that hasn't stopped her from being unabashedly queer, plus-sized, and determined to make award-winning movies that showcase the diversity of her community. She was so close to her goal, appearing at festivals and gaining attention for her short films, when grief came and shattered Diana's directorial dreams. I will say, this book taught me the power of a book cover, because if I hadn't seen the Substack note, the pink of this, I probably wouldn't have picked it up, but I'm glad I did. It was a really great book. It kind of reminded me a little bit of, my friend is writing a book that's coming out hopefully soon. Yeah, I don't know where that's at in that process, but she's writing a book that is very like unapologetically queer, and it's a YA book, so that's different than this one, but it kind of reminded me in that sense of like how important that representation is, and I would actually call this good representation as well, and so that was really cool. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of rare that a main character in a book is not thin and not trying to be thin. I mean, I've read books of plus-size women before that all of their inner thoughts are about how they need to lose weight, so it's kind of nice to not have that be a thread in this at all. It also tackles biphobia pretty head-on in a way that I've not really seen before, and so I really liked that. Yeah, there's just a lot in this book that I didn't really know what to expect from it, and I really ended up liking it. Yeah, good representation, good storylines. Yeah, and there's also a lot of like good world building in this book too. I think there is like an element of romance to it, but there's a lot more in the story, and there are a lot of characters that have full backstories and full lives, and that was really nice too. I think a lot of times if I read a book that's more romance focused, it's pretty much just those two characters with like some side characters, but the side characters in this book were fully fleshed out and really good characters. So I appreciated that as well. So would I recommend this book? Yes, which I'm shocked at a pink cover, me saying yes. But yes, I would recommend this book. And then this is not fiction, but it's kind of a side book I read that has nothing to do with the book I'm writing. So I'll add this here, Letters to a Young Playwright. This, I think, I don't know if I'll be a playwright. That would be great. That doesn't seem like a career path for me, especially if I'm living in Nebraska, but this has a lot of really good information. I think for any writers, there's, a section in it that's like, hey, things to do instead of write your play. And it's like, go take a walk and go outside and like live a life. Don't just sit behind a computer. And so that was, good to read, things like that. So that is another book I read this month. And then I reread, and I'll just hold them up at the same time, the Hunger Games series to date, because there's a new Hunger Games series or book in the series coming out, I think in like 2 weeks. It's the 18th, I think. And I'm just so excited for it. I loved the Hunger Games. This book itself, picking it up felt so emotional because I remembered reading it, when I was, I think 14 or 13, and the movie was about to come out. My friends were really excited about it, and we all passed around a copy of it and read it, and somehow I think I ended up with our copy that we passed around. And it's just such a good series, and it's, I don't know, it's just so nice. I think especially with everything that's happened with J.K. Rowling, and it's just so nice to have a series that, followed me from childhood and into adulthood, is still creating new, things for us to read. And just, yeah, it's a world that was built so well that it's important to read when I was 13 and important to read now that I'm well into my 20s. And so I love Suzanne Collins. And so, yeah, I'm really excited to read more about Haymitch's story. So yeah, I'm sure that will be in my next month's roundup because I am hoping to get it the day it comes out and just read it. I pre-ordered it, so I'm hoping I get it actually a little bit early. Sometimes that happens, but I doubt it will for this one. But yeah, I just shouldn't ramble on about the Hunger Games too much because people know about these books, but I really was happy to reread them. I will say, like, rereading it, I did kind of skip through the arena. I forgot how horrible the arena is, and I'm also very glad now as a reread, and I'll probably rewatch, that the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes is at the end now when I read through, because ending on the Mockingjay, and it's as it was intended, but ending on the Mockingjay is so depressing, I think. Sometimes I'll return to the books or the movies when I'm like having a bad mental health streak, and I don't really know why I do this, because every time when I would get to the Mockingjay, I would be like, this is the most depressing thing in the world. Why did I do this to myself? The war ends, and then really, it's not better. Like, it's just rough. And so having the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes and having Lucy Gray be like, however you want to interpret what happens to her, I think there's just like a note more of hope in that story, even though it's coming still. But yeah, so I'm really excited to read about Haymitch's story. I'm hoping that it also ends on maybe some sort of a note of interpretation that you could interpret as hope so that doesn't go away. But yeah, I'm really happy that Suzanne Collins is writing another one and that it'll be out soon. So thank you for listening to me ramble about what I read this month, and I sure hope I keep on track, and we'll be back next month for my March reads.